I used to think being a mother meant being everything all the time, no matter what. I worked 2 jobs for most of my adult life, waited tables during the day, and stocked shelves overnight. My name is Joanna, and for 24 years my world revolved around one person, my son Ethan. He was my reason for skipping meals, my excuse for never buying new clothes, the face I imagined when walking home after double shifts in the rain. I raised him alone with more grit than grace, but I gave him everything I had. And I thought that had to count for something. It didn't. Not when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just disappear, I don't give a damn." He said it like a final sentence, loud enough to echo off the hallway walls, sharp enough to slice through every memory we'd ever shared. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I just stood there for a second, feeling the last string snap inside me like a frayed wire giving way. Then I turned around and walked into my room. I didn't pack much. Just my purse, phone, charger, and car keys. The groceries I'd bought that morning were still on the counter. The laundry I'd folded still warm in the basket. I left it all. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it hard. I walked out like I was heading to the store, like I'd be back before dinner, but deep down, I knew I was done. Not just tired, not just hurt. Done. He stood in the hallway with that smug grin like he'd finally won something, like throwing me out was his moment of power. I think he expected me to beg, or cry, maybe even slap him. But I didn't give him that. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't leaving because I was weak. I left because I was finally strong enough to walk away. That was the real shift, not his words, not the insult. But the moment I realized I didn't have to stay and prove anything anymore. As I stepped outside, something strange happened. I felt light, not free, not happy, just unburdened. Like I'd been carrying someone else's weight for so long, I forgot what standing straight felt like. I sat in the car for a while, staring at the front door, half expecting it to swing open, half hoping he'd call my name. But it stayed shut, and my phone stayed silent. So I put the key in the ignition and drove. That was the first time in years I didn't have anywhere to be. No shift, no errands, no list. Just me in an old car with a quarter tank of gas and nothing left to hold on to. And in that quiet, with the hum of the engine beneath me and the sound of my own breath steadying in my chest, I realized something. Love without respect is just captivity. And I had been imprisoned in my own house for too long. That was the day I stopped being just Ethan's mom. That was the day I became Joanna again. And it all started with 6 words that broke something in me but also set me free. Just disappear. I don't give a damn. He meant it as a dismissal, but I took it as permission. And for once, I didn't look back. Ethan wasn't always like that. He used to spend his afternoons playing video games, scrolling aimlessly, maybe helping me carry groceries once in a while. He had no big plan, but at least he still laughed at my bad jokes and remembered to say goodnight. That started to change the day he stumbled across Lex. I only knew him by the sound of his voice, deep, confident, always talking like he was revealing some hidden truth. Ethan called him a mentor. I called him a salesman with slick hair and a borrowed Rolex. Lex spoke in absolutes. Things like success are a mindset, and if your parents don't support your vision, cut them off. At first, I thought it was a phase, some internet fantasy that would burn out. But it didn't. He started parroting Lex's lines at dinner. Told me college was for sheep and real men build their own empires. I asked where this empire was. He rolled his eyes and said I wouldn't get it. It wasn't just the words. It was how he said them. Like every sentence from Lex was sacred, like he'd found some holy book, and I was the enemy of faith. That scared me more than anything. He stopped asking for advice, stopped helping around the house. He'd stay up all night on Zoom calls with strangers shouting hype phrases into a screen like they were preparing for battle. I'd pass his room and hear things like, "Raise your vibration and money is just energy." I tried to talk to him, showed him the signs, the fake testimonials, the countdown clocks that never ended the vague promises. He didn't care. He told me I was jealous, said I didn't want him to win. That's when I knew I was losing him. Not to drugs or a bad crowd, but to an idea, a voice that made him feel powerful while teaching him to despise where he came from. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't compete with a dream that told him he didn't need me. It happened slowly at first. Dishes left in the sink. Laundry, piling up lights left on all night. I thought he was just distracted or maybe going through something internal he didn't want to talk about. But then he stopped saying good morning. Stopped thanking me when I brought him dinner. His bedroom door was always shut, and when it was open, I felt like I was intruding on something I no longer understood. He started using Lex's phrases in everyday conversation. If I reminded him about rent or asked for help, he'd call it minimum wage energy or tell me I was stuck in a scarcity mindset. I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. He moved like the house wasn't ours anymore. Played music late at night, ignored the rules, and stopped cleaning up after himself. He'd stare at me like I was just someone in his way, not the woman who raised him from scratch. One afternoon, I found a list he had written on a whiteboard by his desk. Family equals comfort equals weakness. I stared at it for minutes, not sure whether to cry or scream. I didn't do either. I just erased it while he was out. I remember sitting on the couch and listening to him on a call. He was shouting about legacy and passive income, pacing like a general on a battlefield. I looked down at my hands and realized they were shaking. It wasn't fear. It was grief. Grief for the version of Ethan who used to ask how my day was. Grief for the quiet dinners we used to have. Grief for the space we once shared that now felt like a battlefield with no truce in sight. I didn't recognize him anymore. And what scared me most wasn't that he changed. It was that he seemed proud of it. Like being cruel made him strong. Like cutting me down was part of his climb. I checked my bank account out of habit, not suspicion. I wasn't expecting to see it drained. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some processing error, maybe a wrong transfer. But the more I looked, the more real it became. 2 large withdrawals, one for $5,000, another for $3,000. Both were sent to a name I didn't recognize. My heart sank, but my gut already knew where it went. I stormed into Ethan's room. He didn't even flinch. He was sitting at his desk, headphones halfway off, scrolling through some group chat filled with people calling each other kings. I held up my phone, my voice shaking, and asked him if he knew what I was looking at. He looked at the screen like it was a grocery list, said it was an investment, said Lex had invited him into something exclusive, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, like that made it okay. I told him it was theft, that he'd stolen from me. He laughed like I was being dramatic, called it seed money, said I should be proud he was finally taking initiative. I couldn't believe the arrogance in his voice. I asked how he got my information. He said the old laptop still remembered the details, like that excused it, like violating my trust was just a technicality. He stood up, got in my face, and told me I was holding him back, that I was leeching off his energy, that he'd never be anything as long as I kept dragging him down with my fear and small mindset. I felt something break inside me, not anger, not even sadness. Just the final crack in something that had been crumbling for months. Then he said it. Just disappear. I don't give a damn. It didn't come out in a whisper. It came out like a sentence he'd been waiting to say. It gave him power. I looked at him, but I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. Someone who'd bought into a lie so completely he couldn't recognize the person who kept him alive all these years. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just nodded once. Quiet. Like I finally understood. I went back to my room and picked up the same bag I always use for groceries, put in my wallet, my phone, my charger. I didn't even take a jacket. I walked out without a word. He didn't follow. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't even look up. And that told me everything I needed to know. The silence in the car was loud. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. My heart felt hollow, like I'd left it somewhere on the floor behind me. But I drove. Not because I had a plan, just because I knew I couldn't stay another minute in a house where I was no longer human. That night, I slept on Tina's couch. She didn't ask for details, just handed me a blanket and let me cry. I didn't say much because there wasn't much left to say. Ethan had finally said the thing I never thought he'd say. And I had finally done the thing I never thought I could do. I walked away. Not because I stopped loving him, but because he stopped deserving that love. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself. After I left, Ethan moved Amber in like it was the next phase of his master plan. She was young pretty, and just impressed enough to believe everything he said. They posted videos together in the kitchen I used to cook, in calling each other boss and queen while drinking coffee I used to buy. He kept the content coming. Motivational quotes layered over grainy videos of him pacing in his robe. He'd talk about elevation mindset and cutting out toxic people. Never mentioned me by name, but the captions made it clear who the villain was supposed to be. Lex was still feeding him dreams, new voice notes, new promises, and more tears to unlock. Ethan called them investments. The credit card companies called them missed payments. The fridge got emptier, but the posts got louder. He recorded from the same two angles every time, careful to keep the camera off the stack of unopened bills on the table. The lights flickered when the heater kicked on. He called it ambiance. I knew it was the power grid warning him that it was almost due. Amber started to look tired. She stopped tagging him in her selfies. Her captions shifted from power couple to solo goals. In one live stream, she scrolled on her phone the entire time he talked about legacy. When someone asked her a question, she didn't even look up. The mentor told him to show abundance or die broke, so Ethan stacked play money in the background, borrowed shoes from a friend, and wore the same 3 outfits in rotation. He told his followers he was saving for Dubai. I knew he hadn't paid rent in weeks. He kept saying he was close, one deal away, one big payout that would flip everything. But the cracks were showing not just in the apartment, but in his eyes. There was a moment in one of his videos where the screen glitched. Just for a second, you could see an eviction notice taped to the back door. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and thought no one else would. But anyone paying attention could see it. The empire was leaking, and the king was still pretending it was raining. Ethan wired the final $10,000 from 3 loan apps into a crypto wallet Lex said was secure. He waited at the counter in his bathrobe, refreshing his inbox every few seconds like it was Christmas morning. The confirmation email never came. By 9, nothing. By 10, still silence. The Discord server disappeared first. Then the Telegram group emptied. Every admin removed, every message gone. Lex's Instagram was wiped. His YouTube channel is blank. The number Ethan used to call him went straight to voicemail. Amber sat across from him, watching his fingers tremble on the keyboard. She asked if he got a receipt. He said crypto didn't do receipts. She stared like she was finally seeing him clearly. Then she stood up and started packing. He tried to stop her, told her it was just a time zone thing, that Lex was building something bigger. She didn't argue. She just zipped her bag and grabbed her skincare from the bathroom shelf. He asked if she was seriously leaving. She said she wasn't going to be the girl who dated a guy who got scammed by someone named Lex. She left without slamming the door. That was the worst part. No drama, no tears, just absence. Ethan tried calling everyone he thought might still believe in him. Nobody picked up. Not the cousin he loaned money to once. Not the old high school friend who offered him a job at a car wash. The people who used to comment fire emojis on his posts were suddenly quiet. He opened his banking app and saw red across every line. His balance was negative. The interest on the loans was rising by the hour. The fridge hummed like it was mocking him. Inside, everything had spoiled. For the first time, the silence felt like a sound. Not peaceful, not empty, but loud in a way that scraped against his thoughts. He stood in the living room where he once shouted about empires and energy. Now he couldn't even pay for Wi-Fi. There was no one left. Not Lex, not Amber, not even his mother. He had spent so long cutting people off he hadn't noticed there was no one left to reach for, and now the echo was all he had. It was just after sunset when I saw the shadow move past the porch light. I didn't need to look twice to know who it was. The way he moved slow and unsure told me everything before I even saw his face. Ethan didn't knock. He just sat down on the steps like the weight of his body was too much to carry any further. Hoodie pulled low arms wrapped around his knees like he was trying to shrink out of the world. I watched from behind the curtain, quiet and still. He leaned his head back against the door and closed his eyes as if maybe I would feel it sense him there through the wood. But I didn't open. The house was warm inside. The lights were on. The sound of a sitcom played faintly in the background, but out there it was cold. And he made no move to leave. I poured a cup of tea I didn't want and sat near the window where he couldn't see me. For a long time, I just listened to the silence between us. It wasn't awkward. It was final. It was earned. He shifted once, maybe twice, pulled his hood tighter, rubbed his hands together. I saw him glance at the doorknob a few times like he was waiting for it to turn. But it never did. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity. He needed to feel the cost of what he'd done. Not through words or shouting, but through the space he'd carved between us with every choice he made. The porch light flickered once. He looked up at it, maybe hoping it was a sign. It wasn't. I left it on because I didn't want him to be in the dark. But that didn't mean I'd open the door. That night, he stayed curled on the step until his body slumped against the railing. I didn't wake him. I didn't cover him. I let the silence speak. Because some lessons don't come with warmth. Some come with cold concrete and no answers. When I opened the door the next morning, he was still there, curled against the step like someone left behind, eyes swollen, hoodie damp from dew. He didn't move at first, just blinked up at me like he wasn't sure I was real. I didn't speak. I stepped aside. He stood slowly stiff and shivering and followed me in like a shadow unsure of its shape. I poured him a glass of water and set it on the counter. No questions. No embrace. Just the sound of the faucet and his quiet breathing as he took a seat at the edge of the couch, if it might reject him too. After a moment, he said he messed up. I nodded. He said he lost everything. I nodded again. Then came the only question I was waiting for. Why did you open the door? I looked him in the eyes and answered without flinching. Because you finally knocked like a man. I didn't say more than I needed to. I told him there was a mattress in the spare room, a roof over his head for 30 days. After that, he was on his own again. There would be rules. He would apply for work every day. No streaming, no lies, no excuses. No asking for second chances when he hadn't earned a first one. He didn't argue, just nodded and took a sip of water like it was the first thing he'd tasted in days. I didn't offer sympathy. I offered structure. Because love without discipline isn't love, it's enablement. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a lifeline tied tight and short. I needed to see what he'd do with it before I ever let him get close again. He didn't cry. Neither did I. We sat there in the quiet, not as mother and son, but as two people starting from nothing. And in that moment, he understood something he had never before. Being let in didn't mean being let off the hook. It meant being watched, not with hope, but with caution. The first week, Ethan didn't say much. He woke up early before the sun and left his phone on the kitchen counter like it was part of the deal. I noticed the job search tabs open on the living room laptop. I didn't comment. I just made my coffee and watched from across the room. He started folding his blanket each morning, washed his own dishes without being asked, didn't touch the thermostat, didn't leave his shoes in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was different. There were no long speeches, no emotional outbursts, just a quiet effort. Some days he came back with rejection emails on his face. I could see it, even if he never said the words. He applied for warehouse shifts, dishwashing gigs, anything with a schedule and a paycheck. I heard him call back twice, to places that hadn't responded, his voice steady but tired. When I passed by the door, he straightened up like he didn't want me to hear desperation in his tone. I didn't ask about Lex, didn't bring up Amber. Those ghosts could haunt him without my help. Instead, I kept my boundaries tight. Dinner was for me. Groceries were split. This wasn't home, it was a station. A stop before something else. At night, he sat at the table and scribbled in a notebook. Not content, not mantras, just lists. I glanced once and saw budget plans, payment breakdowns, even a tally of interest on one of his loans. I didn't praise him. I didn't discourage him either. Some days were hard to watch, like when he flinched at a bank call or stared at the ramen he couldn't afford to improve. I saw the shake in his hand when he poured gas into my mower and offered to cut the lawn. Not a bribe, not a gesture. Just a man doing what needed doing. I still didn't trust him, not fully. Trust takes time, and time takes proof. But I was no longer angry, just watchful. Then, on day 22, he knocked on my bedroom door, asked if he could use the printer, said a restaurant had called back. He had an interview. I nodded and pointed to the drawer. He thanked me, and for the first time in a long time, I believed he meant it. That night, he came home with an apron in his hand and grease on his shoes. Said it wasn't much, but it was something. I said nothing, just passed him the laundry detergent when he opened the washer. Progress is not a speech. It's a pattern. It's consistent, quiet, and often unnoticed. But I noticed. On day 30, I handed him an envelope with 3 apartment listings and a bus schedule. He looked at me like he wanted to say something bigger. Maybe sorry. Maybe I love you. But he didn't. He just nodded and folded the paper like it was sacred. He turned toward the door, then paused. Asked if we were okay. I looked at him and answered slowly. You don't deserve a hug, but you earned a chance. And in that moment, that was enough.